Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And it's the center of British Columbia. It is the capital of British Columbia. And British Columbia, an amazing province and a beautiful day, as you can see in the back. And I have a special guest today and a friend. Her name is Shirley Bond. Shirley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. It is a beautiful day, and I'm so excited about being here with you.
Now, for our guest, Shirley has quite a career, and we're talking about that, but she is also the current MLA for Prince George-Valemount.
That's right.
And you've been in Prince George for...
Well, I was born here, John.
You were born here?
I was, yes. And so very deep roots in this community. My parents... actually, I grew up not far from here, just on on George Street, just over from 3rd Avenue. And this is my home, and I've lived here my whole life.
Yeah. Now, I always find it interesting with you because I've known you for a long time, and you allow me to say this because it's all over in your publications that you do, is you were born in 1956 or 57.
Well, I won't tell you which one it is. It's actually 1956.
Yeah,
so, and very proud of that. I continue to work very hard, as you do, and there's always I don't know why people don't know that. It is quite clear I was born in 1956.
Yeah, in Prince George.
Yes,
and you know, so we have known each other for a long time, and we were in politics together, and I've been very involved, and so have you. And your career was on the political side already. You were very involved in 3 or 4 terms in the school board. Starting when?
Well, that was actually, I'm trying to think of when that began. I ran provincially, obviously, in 2001, and had been elected 4 times prior to that on the Prince George School Board. So obviously into the 1990s and working as a school trustee. I always thought that was such an important job,
yes,
John.
Absolutely, no question.
You know, when you think about our most important asset, it's really young people and kids. So it was a really good opportunity for me to learn about a life in public service, and some challenging days those were, as we were looking at shrinking populations in schools and all of the challenges that came with that. So very proud of my work here in this community, and yes, it started actually as a parent at District Advisory Council. That's how I started. I went to a meeting when our kids went to kindergarten.
You have 2 kids.
I do.
Those are twins.
Yes, they are. That's right.
Their names are?
Chris and Melissa. And our daughter, Melissa, lives in Australia with her husband.
Yeah.
And my son, Chris, and his wife, Christina, live here with our 2 grandsons.
In Prince George?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I got involved by being a parent who showed up at a parent advisory council, and no one would take on the role of running the Parent Advisory Council. So I remember going home, our kids were in kindergarten, and said to Bill, "Well, you won't believe what just happened." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "I'm the chair of the Parent Advisory Council." And
just like no plans.
Not at all.
Just being there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you know, that mattered to me, being involved in our kids' school, and did that for many, many years, including serving hot lunch to kids in school and all of the things that parents step up and do in our school system. So that's how I got my start.
In the last year of the 4 terms, you were the chair.
That's correct, I was.
Yeah. And then you got the idea, the next thing that happened in your life, you thought, I'm going to run for politics provincially.
Well,
2001.
That's right. And, you know, really there was a step in between where I was involved in the District Parent Advisory Council, working with parents more broadly, and running as a school trustee. And then, you know, actually Gordon Campbell came to the north and said, you know, I need people to run, and would you consider it? And the first time I actually said no. I said, you know, I have a family and I want to be at home and I want to contribute to my community. But he came back again and said, you know, we really need great people in northern BC. And so it was scary and humbling all at once. but looking back, it was an amazing decision for me, and
quite an experience, and to run as an MLA. And were there any other candidates running against you?
Well, there was, and I'm sitting across from him, and he was a fierce competitor.
I have to say that because now the interesting part about Shirley and myself, we are friends, and if I look across the world, and especially to the United States, these are wars, and they get very, very heavy and heavy duty. Where with us, we were very civil here. Typical Canadian, being very civil, and and you were successful and won the election, and I think you served us well, and you've been an amazing MLA.
Well, thank you, John, and we did. We ran a very grassroots supportive campaign, and in the end of the day, we knew this. Prince George needed a strong representative, and whoever won that race, we knew that was going to be the case. So I've appreciated your friendship and watching the way you have chosen to contribute to our province in amazing ways. So elected office is one way, but there's lots of other ways to do that. So
there's no question about that. Now, and I knew you well, I knew Bill well, and Bill passed away in 2020.
That's correct.
In June, and so that was a tough period for you.
It was devastating, and I think one of the things that my life, I'm still adjusting to life without a partner that you've had for over 4 decades. Very difficult. He was an amazing person. He was very non-judgmental, completely loving, and I think, John, the hardest part was that it was during the pandemic, which meant that we were separated, and that was probably the most devastating part, was the fact that at the worst time of your life, you can't be with the people who need to be with you.
Exactly.
And that was extremely painful. Over the course of Bill's illness, both here in Prince George, and then he was airlifted to Vancouver, I only saw him once, very briefly, for a few minutes. And my husband died of a massive left brain stroke. Shocking, unexpected, and just personally devastating. So
it happened fairly quickly, and
it did.
So he was already struggling with some issues, and then but when he had the stroke, was it here in Prince George?
So Bill had been struggling for a period of time. They were uncertain what was wrong, and eventually, I'm so grateful to the medical team he had here, his doctors and others that helped us. They realized that he had an infection and that it couldn't be dealt with because it was in one of his heart valves. And so in the middle of a pandemic, with virtually no airline flights, all of those things, Bill was transported to St. Paul's.
St. Paul's in Vancouver.
And my daughter-in-law and I got on the only flight out of Prince George at that time. There was one flight to be beside Bill in a hotel, obviously. So while we were waiting for very serious heart surgery, unexpectedly, Bill had a stroke, and it was shocking. We literally got a phone call.
Totally unexpected.
Yes, and I remember answering my cell phone that night, and the physician said to me, "Mrs. Bond, this is one of those calls that a physician never wants to make." And my first question was, is my husband all right? And they told me that he had suffered a massive brain stroke. And so Bill was really lost from that point on. But at that point, we were able to be at the hospital for periods of time until, of course, Bill simply didn't recover from the stroke. So we were waiting for heart surgery, and then what took his life was actually a stroke. So it was
totally not
unexpected.
Unexpected, not connected.
No.
And saying that it just happened just like that. And
John, one of the things that it's really taught me about is, we always say very casually that life is too short. Boy, did I ever learn about that. When you sort of think about where your life is going to go and what you're going to, what are you going to do in those years where, they're set aside for Bill and I. And what's happened is that never came. And so, so many people come to me now and say, well, we're thinking of doing this, or we'd like to do that. And my answer is, do it.
Do it.
Do it. You just
because
never
you
know.
were at the phase of still, and I knew him well as well, and he was very active and knew everybody and very supportive to you, and relatively young, let's face it, and so much left to do, and all of a sudden, what you planned has changed. You know, so
one of the most difficult things was my daughter and her husband live in Australia, and so we, work is always very busy, and we had put off a visit, and then the pandemic struck, and of course, Australia had some of the most significant restrictions in the world. And so, we had planned a trip, and then Bill got sick, we had a pandemic, and I look back now and I think, those moments where I should have simply said, yes, we need to do this, and didn't. And so I'm grateful for the life we had. It was incredible. I have the most amazing, more than 4-decade marriage and partnership.
41 years?
41. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for that. So I just say to people regularly, don't wait. You just never know if that time is going to be there. And so I'm learning to reflect more on the life we had, not the life we didn't get to finish together.
And that's the right approach, right?
I think so. It's hard. It's really hard, because you look and you don't want to have regrets, but you think about, we could have done this or we should have done that. But I'm focusing on gratitude. Yeah,
but if I kind of look at it, you've been now in as an MLA for the last 22 years or something like that. And contrary to what most people think, those jobs are extremely demanding. And if I look at your career, started then, and all the different steps and all the different things that happened first under Gordon Campbell, you were already active in a way, but then as it went through all the changes that took place, you became... You virtually filled every single portfolio that I can, other than Forrest.
That's true. People often say, John, they wonder if I can keep a job, because I did move through a lot of ministries. But, you're right. You learn the job on the job. And I mean, you did that in your life as well. But I don't think anyone really anticipates what the learning curve is like. And when I was first elected, I mean, I had been to the Parliament buildings, but I could honestly tell you, I didn't know where the washrooms were in the place. And so it was an enormous learning curve. And I'm really lucky that I had leaders in my life that believed in me and trusted me and said, we're going to give you important work to do. And so then you have to deliver for them. So yes, very demanding lifestyle. I think you know this well. The travel back and forth is difficult. Made ever more difficult by the pandemic. Fewer flights, crowded, delays, all those things. But it's part of the job, and it comes with this love for serving the people that live here.
Well, that is the underlying foundation that you have, is that, your relationship with the community as a whole. And then the other one, you're a very good communicator, and you like people interacting with people, being responsive. That makes you so unique for this particular position. And then your involvement with the school board and already having that as part of your life, I believe.
I think that's true. I think it was a great training ground for me, being a locally elected official, and then just being given unbelievable opportunities provincially. And, my first job in government was in essence to deliver the Northern Medical Program. And so, every time I look at that beautiful university on the hill, and I think about the fact that for the first time in history, we were going to train medical professionals, physicians here in the North. And I still remember, Gordon sitting me down and saying, this is your job and you need to deliver. And so I think when you have those deep roots, it inspires you to work harder. And I feel that today. There are people who wonder what drives you. It's the place we live and the people who live here.
But you see, your involvement in both UNBC, CNC, and all that infrastructure around a community and a region that makes it what it is, all takes a lot of effort on the part of MLAs, but also the rest of the community. A lot of times people don't see that, of what it takes and what it means, because that being in government, that means dollars are scarce. There's a lot of competition inside of for where they should be allocated. So it takes that big effort and to bring the people behind you ready, and we're still not there. We can still do more, right?
So I'm so glad you said that, because I think people sort of think you reach a place where you think, well, I'm done, or this is finished. It's never like that.
No.
And I look now at things, for example, like needing investment in our hospital.
Yeah.
We have to deliver that. We have to figure out how to get enough attention to make sure that our hospital is revitalized, and that we have a referral center and a regional center that meets the needs of people. And so, I'm going to continue to advocate for that. But I think the most important thing is, we raised our family here.
Right.
And now my grandsons are growing up here. And so when I think about a choice to live in a northern community, should mean that you still have opportunity to have services and support. It shouldn't mean that if you live outside of the Lower Mainland, somehow you're not entitled to have the same kind of services. So for me, that's absolutely critical to the work that I do.
Usually what I say is that, sitting here in particular and talking to my guest, is saying that, to my friends down south, and that probably 75% of the GDP in the province of British Columbia is generated in the north. Don't forget it.
That is so true. And I think that, the challenge we face is having people who don't live here understand what a remarkable place it is to raise a family, to be able to run for public office. When I still sit back and think, I get to represent the people who live here in the Parliament buildings in Victoria. It's a remarkable thing.
And make a difference.
Yes,
Tangible difference.
That opportunity exists here. And when I think about so many urban centers, that's not always the case. So, I think that we live in a very special place, and it is literally full of special people. And I think that's why people like you and I love this place and speak so strongly about our need to have that revenue return to make sure that the government, whatever government, is investing in the places that we live.
So something else that we have somewhat in common is that I was born in Holland in 1940, and makes me 82 and a half, actually, and we were liberated by the Canadians in 1945, April the 12th, 1945. And I knew from that, it made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward I would go to the lands of my heroes, and there was no doubt about that, even from the time I was 5. It was not if, but when. I wanted to go when I was 17, but my parents wouldn't let me, and then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force for 2 years. That was then still a draft, not anymore now. And then when I was 24, I was able to go, and then I had developed another dream. My dad was in the lumber industry, managed a small operation, and I was trained as a furniture maker because I was not very good in school, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. And so I went down to Canada, and I know I had to go to BC. That's where the lumber and the timber was. So I came here in July of 1965. Came off the bus here, the Greyhound station, still is sitting there, the building.
It is.
And came off the bus. I could speak language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, and I actually just, you already know what this is, I'm sure. I had $25.47 in my pocket, and I had the dream I was going to build a lumber mill. And there is no place on earth that I can think of that more beautiful than the country like Canada, for all the many reasons that we have. And then there is no, I say, more beautiful province than British Columbia. And what makes British Columbia so unique is the diversity of the lower portion of the Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, the island, but in particular northern British Columbia, because all around us, you know, it's probably 50 to 100 lakes, and you know, all within driving distance, all close by. We have wildlife all around us, and then the unique part about it is when I came here in July of 1965, it was a boom town. It was, and the questions that people would ask is, when did you get here, when are you leaving? You know, and it has so dramatically changed. Even in a short period, really like that, 60 years, and it's still in progress, obviously, but it has come already such a long way. You know?
Well, we do share a heritage. My mother was Dutch.
Yeah.
And, you know, one thing I know, and you certainly exemplify that in your life and your accomplishments that are many, you know, my mother taught me a hard work ethic.
Yeah.
You know, she knew the value of working hard, and I think she came by that quite naturally with her Dutch heritage, and I'm a very proud daughter of a Dutch mother, as I tell people. She taught us to be grateful for Canadians, and never failed to remind us about the sacrifices that Canadian soldiers made for our families. So I know we share that passion for supporting veterans and, you know, the Legion and people who contributed to our families having the opportunity to be successful. And, you know, I know your work ethic, it speaks for itself. And somehow I think that our Dutch heritage had an awful lot to do with how hard we work.
You see, what I always say is, you know, attitude, passion, work ethic, what follows is success. And you know, that to me was always the foundation. And, you know, and then the other part, you know, like in Holland, as you well know, is that, you know, like even the little children, you know, are aware of the relationship between the Canadians and Holland, and the Second World War. You know, it's still very much part of it. Very
much is. And in fact, you know, that at Christmas there's still candles placed on the graves of soldiers that died, the Canadians that, you know, gave their lives for our families. And I think that gives us a responsibility, and in terms of teaching our children. My mother was reluctant to talk about the war and the impacts, but, you know, my grandfather was very involved in the Dutch resistance, and so I have a very strong passion for supporting veterans and the work that they have done, and I think our job is to talk about remembrance, making sure that
I agree.
They're not forgotten. And, you know, the new generation of young people that are in our world today need to have that appreciation for how we get to live in this beautiful place. The opportunities you were given, they were hard fought.
So what I do, Shirley, and I've been doing for about 10 years, is I always make sure that I take at least 2 or 3, 4 schools, you know, in the week of the November the 11th, and to talk about as to why Remembrance Day, why is it so important? And you know, so this year was in particular a bit hectic for me. You know, I had 2 schools in Surrey, you know, and with one school I had to do the same speech 4 times because there were 600 in each, and which is great. I don't mind. And then rushing back to Prince George and did one here at Dutchess Park and another one up Highway 16, and I think it's very important to talk about that.
I think it is, and you know, your voice matters to those young people who have not necessarily heard the story from their families, from their grandparents, and you know, we have worked very hard to teach our children to be grateful, to give back. You know, that was one thing that was so important to my mom and my dad. My father was English, but my mother was Dutch, and you know, one of the things that they taught us as children, you need to give back to the community that has supported you, and I see that
it's part of the culture.
It is part of our culture, and I see that in the work that you do all the time, and I just stop and think about if everyone had that attitude, where we could just contribute in some way. It doesn't have to be a big way, it's just stepping up. Imagine what a world we'd be living in today if everyone did that.
And that's why we talk about it, and that's why we do it, and it's nothing to do with any agenda or any benefits. it's part of the culture. It's part of saying that, you know, first and foremost, how fortunate we are living here, you know, in Canada, and then particularly in the area that we live. And then if we, especially now, look around the world, thinking in terms of the Ukraine and all the problems, Iran, and all the other problems that are going on, how lucky we are here, and how well we should remember it, and then being part of the community, be involved, you know, in some form or fashion, you know.
I think that's true, and I think that one of the things that I've learned is that, you know, people in this community might know your name or my name, but I think one of the things that I am so deeply touched by is all of the people who do so much without recognition, without any other reason other than wanting to give back. You know, the people who work on the front lines, who work on the, you know, in our downtown, who volunteer. When you think about the generosity of this community, both from a financial perspective, but also time and commitment and volunteerism, that is something I'm enormously proud of. And one of the things, John, that I try to do in the legislature is talk about people who have, you know, in their own way made a difference. And I think that, again, you and I can do that. You with your podcast, me with my legislature, and raising those stories. Because they're the people who make a difference in this place.
And podcasting has been a very interesting vehicle for the, it's relatively new, you know, but, you know, when I became involved in it, as I had told you earlier, is first with Shaw in a different format, and then because of COVID we then created this setting here, and looking around the region on a virtually a daily basis, we interview people that saying, you know, that have done so much, including yourself and others, paramedics and people in the police force and all the people that you're talking about. You know, you know, so it gives us the opportunity to showcase that to the rest of the world.
And that helps us. I mean, we learn from what you're doing as well about some amazing people. You know, you were sharing how much you enjoyed the segment on Meals on Wheels, for example. And, you know, there are a lot of people in this community who wouldn't realize that there are vulnerable seniors who have no family network, who have no support, that rely on programs like Meals on Wheels. And, you know, you have the opportunity through your podcast to say, we need some help here. You know, people step up, and if you don't know, you can't help. And so I think we have a role to play in both of our jobs to say, you know what, we have some things we could do together.
And at the same time, you know, the interesting thing about podcasting is that it's so international. We got people watching all over the world, and it's sometimes amazing, you know, the number of people that we get on some of our podcasts. You know, you know, so it's becoming more and more popular around the world. So that's.
Well, the thing I like about that is that so often people make assumptions about what it's like to live here, or this community, or because we don't, you know, we live 500 miles from Vancouver, or it's a chance for them to get to know the real community and the people who make it special. And that really matters to me, the reputation of this community. And people, you know, you said that when you came, people were saying, how long are you going to be here? How long are you going to go? How many stories have you and I heard where people came for 2 years and have stayed for 2 decades?
Over and over again.
Exactly. And I think it captures you when you come to this place.
But now in particular with COVID and living in the concrete of you know, a big city like Vancouver, or sitting an hour and a half in your car to get to a job, and then looking at a region like this, you know, where nature is all around you, you know, then I think it will become increasingly more attractive to people saying, you know something, you know, we like living in an area like that, and having then the infrastructure, like, you know, we have the best small university in Canada here, College of New Caledonia. We have all the infrastructure here to bring in a family, and like you have, and others will, and from there and then it will grow further and further, in my opinion. You know?
I think so, and I tell people we have our own symphony orchestra. We have
Can you
a
believe
university.
it?
I know,
Really?
and it's exceptionally good.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, every opportunity we have to be advocates and cheerleaders for this part of British Columbia, and I mean, I am enormously privileged. I represent a beautiful constituency. I mean, you know, if you think about McBride and Valemount and the fact that you can get in your vehicle and you can be in some of the most spectacular places on the planet in just an hour or 2 hours. And, you know, so I'm very proud. I love the Robson Valley region. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
I tell all my colleagues that I represent, you know, the riding that has the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies and Mount Robson. And, you know, you think about this place and we are very privileged to live here. And I think that comes with responsibility. Yeah.
Some of the other interesting things that you have been, you know, quite involved in, and so have I, talking about the highest mountain is Good Life, in particular with Jim, you know, and his...
Good Sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has done an amazing job. You and me were there when he celebrated the 30 years ago that he started this amazing, you know, already collecting plants from across Canada since he was a young man. And, you know, so it's very unique in a way.
It's a remarkable story of a passion that has, you know, we all get to benefit from.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to visit there and to, you know, obviously experience and learn about all of the plant life. But I mean, his studio where he, you know, with all of the music, his love and passion for broadcasting.
He's very good as
he is. I have enjoyed being in there, and you know, and again, what a community we have. Somebody found out that, you know, Jim wanted to do a broadcast, be a radio announcer. And so what happens? Somebody makes that happen where we live.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I think, you know, the reason when I think about Jim, and he is such an example of the kind of people that we have that live here.
Yeah, exactly.
Passionate, you know, giving his all, quite literally, to keep the place operating.
Yeah.
You know, thankfully, generous partners and sponsors like you and many other people.
Yeah.
But he still has needs. And, you know, again, I think sharing those stories and talking about how important that place is. And, you know, I certainly want to encourage people to go and visit. And,
I do too.
And spend some time out there. They won't regret it. It's really a gem that a lot of people don't even know exists.
And spring is around the corner, hopefully, quick, and that'd be the right time to also do it.
Oh, absolutely. I can still see, you know, some of the vistas, you know, overlooking the water and the trails and all of the things that you know, the signage that I know you've helped with. And but I think Jim is an example of some of the heroes that we have that live in our community, and very much not about being in the limelight. It's not about him. And so I think it's a pretty special place, and hopefully people will go and visit him, especially this year. I think where are we at 30 years?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about politics now, is that because you've been so involved in all the different levels, including deputy premier, and for a couple of years been...
Oh, it was quite a few. I think it was 6 or 7 as deputy premier. And but I had the opportunity to serve in many ministries, and probably the one that was most personally stretching was being the first woman who served as an attorney general in British Columbia's history.
Yeah.
And, you know, the really challenging part of that is that I'm not a lawyer.
No.
And obviously, you know, so being law advisor to the province, 2 or 3 other people have done that as well, not been lawyers. But it was very difficult, very personally rewarding to work my way through that. But and then most recently, I still think Bill would be very surprised to discover that, you know, I took on the leadership of the party for a period of time. It was supposed to be a short period, but it ended up being, you know, well over a year that I led the party in the legislature. So, it's been, there are incredible moments that I will never forget, and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and if you look at that now, because having gone through all the steps, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but obviously anytime they can call the election, right? Because the NDP is now government. You know, they called the election 2 years ago, a quick flash one, because they had a coalition with the Green Party that, I must say though, Premier John Horgan, I thought a fantastic guy.
Yeah.
You know, I may not necessarily agree with all his politics, but as a person, as an individual, I thought he was, and I know you think of him the same.
You know, that's so important, and I think British Columbians need to hear that from people like us, that, you know, it is, you know, I have obviously a particular political perspective, but there are many things that are nonpartisan, and they should be. And I can tell you this, you know, John Horgan was a widely loved leader, and partly because he was very approachable. He is a person who...
Genuine.
He is very genuine. And I can tell you, John and I have had some very heated debates in the legislature. There's no doubt about that, about policy differences. But on a personal level, you know, I share this story that it was really very touching. When Bill died, one of the first people to reach out and to be extremely caring was John Horgan for my family and I. I will never forget that. It meant a great deal to me. And I remember explicitly the day that I heard that once again he had cancer, and I was actually scheduled to do my weekly media availability. I actually couldn't do it. I literally was so concerned for John and his wife, his kids. So there is a side to politics that people don't see, and that's the relationships that are built on respect, even though we have different views about how to approach issues. So, you know, I wish John nothing but the absolute best. He will very shortly formally resign his seat as MLA. And, you know, when he gave his speech in the legislature and I went over, you know, big bear hug. I mean, we literally have a very good friendship.
And that spoke volumes, right?
Yes, and
a lot of people from both sides of the aisle felt like that. You know?
It was important, and I think people need to see more of that, where it is less confrontational, more looking for solutions.
But in a way, though, that conversations are getting heated is part of the process.
Absolutely.
I like the process, the parliamentary style process that we have versus what we have south of here. I prefer what we have compared to that, and then that means that there are different approaches to it, and there is heated debates, and then eventually it will become something, and then you know, in every 4 years or whatever it is, there is an election, and the people can decide who they want to have lead them as the government. You know, so
I really appreciate that perspective, John, because a lot of people don't appreciate the type of system we have. You know, a democracy which requires there to be critique and to hold the government to account. And so, you know, and I admit I'm known to be very fierce in the legislature, but it's because when I look at this place that we live, we deserve to be heard. We need to have, you know, the government be held to account. And that was true when we were government as well. I mean, the opposition, and I can tell you, John Horgan was a fierce advocate in the legislature. But that's part of the process. And it isn't meant to be personal. It is meant to be based on policy and to drive the agenda and hold the government to account. That's how it works. And I'm with you. I think considering some of the alternatives, the fact that we can have those debates in an environment which allows us to bring different perspectives to the table is incredibly important. I'm learning with age that, and experience, I think, that there are times when we need to reach across the aisle and work together. And, you know, I think, you know, I can say that there are times that happens. In fact, Andrew Weaver, for example, when he was leader of the Green Party, he and I saw common ground when we were looking at geothermal energy, for example. So of course I'm going to talk to him about those issues when it would benefit Valemount. So I think there are moments where British Columbians expect us to work together. The pandemic was certainly one of them. You know, in an unprecedented circumstance, you know, all of the parties came together and agreed on literally billions of dollars of support for British Columbians with very little debate.
And very major decisions. That were made and served us well, in my opinion. You know,
I think so too, and I think that it demonstrated to British Columbians that when things are critical and we need to find urgent solutions, that there are ways to do that. And I still think we need to I think we can be better at what we do in the legislature in terms of how we approach issues. But I also think that asking tough questions is part of that process.
Absolutely.
And there is some discomfort that comes with that, but it's also part of the process. So I'm with you. I think no system is perfect, but ours works pretty well.
Yeah, and in reality, Shirley, it's no different that I'm on different boards where I represent the people that elected me to the board is to bring forward what I believe is in best interest of that entity, and I will be quite vocal about it if I believe that, and it's no different for you. You were elected, you know, to be the MLA for the riding of Valemount, Prince George, but the other part that you also, you were elected as a representative of BC, and you have an obligation to bring forward the best ability that you have in the interest of the party, but in the interest of all of BC as well.
And you know, one of the things that is, people assume that, you know, when you have been in public office for a while, that you've developed this really thick skin, and for me that's not true. I still, you know, criticism is hard to take, and on the other hand, I do know that it's part of the job. It comes with the territory, but I think there are ways to have those conversations about different opinions in ways that are more respectful. So, you know, I think one of the things that concerns me about particularly women in politics is that so often women are reluctant to get involved because of, you know, major changes to lifestyle, but also the very personal approach that many people take. And, you know, social media has pluses and minuses, and the ability to be anonymous and say whatever you want has been very challenging. And, you know, even over the last few weeks, I've watched as there has been unbelievable levels of criticism, particularly against women. And it's been very difficult personally. You know, people comment on, you know, your hair and your clothing and your whatever it happens to be. You know, what I want them to do is, I'm willing to debate the policy, but for heaven's sakes, let's find a way to do that in a way that's more respectful.
That's troubling, really, isn't it? You know, so that
it's very discouraging. And I watched last week, for example, where I have a female colleague, and she is so capable. She has a law degree, and she is also an accountant. And she made a comment on you know, a particular government initiative, and the response back was, "Well, you're nothing but a dumb blonde." You know, like, how in this day and age is that an appropriate comment? She is capable, she is smart, she's where she needs to be, you know, in terms of a political career, and that's the kind of stuff that, you know, she has to put up with.
Yeah, I think there was another, maybe one of the MLAs from down south that resigned. Was she from the NDP government?
Yes, she was, and that was my colleague Melanie Mark. And
very troubling.
Yes.
You know, that I saw the emotional, and she had been in government for 7 years. This was not, I got that yesterday and it's a disappointment today. She put a lot, and she was the only Indigenous woman. And
yeah, that is hard, and there's, you know, I mean, obviously, listening in the legislature that day to, you know, the feelings that she had about her time in the legislature was very difficult. And I think it requires all of us to think about, how do we do the business of government and opposition in a way that doesn't create that kind of personal feeling of attack. And it is hard. I admit, as I said, I would certainly be seen as someone who asks tough questions, and, you know, that's my job.
That's different, though.
It is.
Asking
I hope
tough
so.
questions versus something that goes beyond that.
Yes.
You know, it's going over that boundary is just.
And you know, Melanie and I certainly. She visited Prince George many times. We were very, you know, collaborative with one another, and it's heartbreaking to hear that kind of feeling. And those are the feelings she has, and so they are her feelings, and we need to grapple with what caused that in the legislature. But I do know that, you know, I I think we've come a long way when it comes to more equity in the political world, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, no question.
We have more women in the legislature than we've had before.
But still some way to go.
There is. Yeah. And women have an important role to play in every facet of life in British Columbia, whether it's business or whether it's sport or whether it's the political realm.
Correct. So that then gets me to the more difficult question, is that, so you never quite know when they will call the next election, but we're pretty sure that there will be one in 2024.
That's right.
So have you thought about that at all in terms of, Shirley, will you stay in, or will you say, I've seen enough now, or I'm not trying to...
Not at all, no. Yeah. And it's a very legitimate question, and I think it's an important one. I think there's still work to be done.
We're not ready to lose you yet. That's it.
Well, you know, and I think I still have some things to contribute.
I would say so, yeah.
And I think as long as I can continue to work hard to bring the voice of Northern British Columbians to the legislature, I think that's an important consideration. So, you know, that's certainly my intent. Yeah. And I also think, John, as we look around us, there is a lot of change happening here. Yeah. You know, we've just learned that my colleague, Mike Morris, is not going to run again. Yeah. So we will have a new MLA in that riding. We have an interesting political circumstance in the Chaco Lakes where, you know, John Rustad is now sitting as an independent. And we have the Electoral Boundaries Commission, which will report out shortly, which could create very dramatic changes to my riding and to this whole region. So I think there's also a need for some continuity, for some experience as we see new people join the team. And I am all about that. I mean, we do need to make sure we're welcoming new people to our team, to the political world. Yeah. But I've always believed that great teams are a balance of experience and newness, and you have to find that mix.
I agree with you.
So I appreciate our leader very much. He has been extremely supportive personally, and I look forward to supporting him and his work as we lay out a vision for British Columbians.
Yeah, and then Kevin Falcon, obviously we know them both well because he was in government for quite a period of time, has good experience, you know, and is very politically smart, and you know, and I think that's certainly a step forward for the BC Liberals who are contemplating at some point to change their name. You know, and
sooner rather than later. I think it's fairly imminent. Yeah. And you know, I mean, I am not at all. You know, we worked hard and accomplished a lot under the name of the BC Liberals. And as you know, from our time together, you know, there is a lot of brand confusion. We are not connected federally. No. We are very different in terms of the groups that organize political parties. But that causes confusion all over the place. And one of the reasons I like the sense that we would consider another name is we're a really big tent party, and we have people who are, you know, are very environmentally conscious. They're very, you know, they would probably be more associated with the Green Party, and we have people that are, you know, far more left. So we want to be that party that reflects a far broader view. So that name change is coming.
In middle of the road, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, and a change of name is, you know, you would know from your business experience and expertise, branding is one thing, but I'll tell you what, underneath the name change, British Columbians have to see that we understand what their needs and concerns are. I mean, we were sent a very strong message that, you know, we had lost the confidence of British Columbians, and we have to earn that right to govern again. Correct. So name change important, but I'll tell you what we really need beneath that is a vision and a series of policy initiatives that will resonate with British Columbians, and that's really the most important work.
Yeah, and then in the north here, we both have to find a new candidate for the Chaco Lakes, as well as for, unfortunately, it was Mike riding Prince George-Mackenzie region. You know, so that will become important for the north in particular. And you know, I have to tell you a little bit about my political involvement. Is that you know, I was working hard building my mill. I started the mill, it was $25,000 and 3 employees in 1975. Worked as long as I could possibly stay awake, 7 days a week.
I
did that for about 30 years. And then a friend of mine, you know, invited me to a meeting. I didn't go to a meeting. I was working in the mill and usually was grease all over, and I was not ready to go to meetings. But anyway, he talked me into go to a meeting. Dennis Jackson and his wife Judy.
Of course.
And it was on a Friday. And what was it all about? He said it's the AGM of the Socrates. And I said, oh, okay. And something happened to me that happened to you. And you know, so there I'm sitting there, and they're electing a new president. And I'm just sitting there and taking everything in, and so, you know, and okay, you know, and they say, yeah, I nominate John Brink as the president. And they went all like, yeah. And no, the president of the riding.
I've been there, done that.
and I think I was the long-serving president of the riding, Prince George North then, you know, and right until the time that I signed in for the running for the MLA of with you, and then again after that, even when Pat Bell was in that riding, so there must have been for God knows how many years, but 15, 20 years or so. And so, which is quite an experience too, because if you're riding president in particular, then also you're on the board of directors of the party, you know, which brings you into, you know, discussions on the provincial level.
Absolutely.
But it's also quite an experience, you know. So
it is, and it's a, you know, I think that so many people ask me, you know, how do we get involved and how do we make a difference and how do we do those things? And I think just like you, it's showing up and it's going and getting. I mean, the entire time I was on the school board, I didn't belong to a political party. I wanted to contribute in my community. I wanted to support the school system. It was only after that and when other people encouraged me to get involved at the provincial level. But, you know, it is certainly a time of change in northern British Columbia. As you say, we're going to need to look at Nechako Lakes, what happens there. We're going to look at Mike's riding, and I just want to make sure that we continue to have an experienced voice at the table, somebody who is going to help, you know, mentor, you know, new candidates, those kinds of things. So, I mean, I'm always going to think about, you know, the timing and my health, my family, those things matter. But I also know that we need experience and we need renewal at the same time.
There's no question about that.
So, you know, that's my thinking at the moment, and quite excited about, you know, Kevin's leadership and,
me too,
and the contributions he will make to the province.
And same as Brian, you know, that, you know, being part of the infrastructure in terms of the Ministry of Forest and, you know, those as the critic. You know, the other thing I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that, you know, is that obviously we have had a lot of challenges as a province, and especially as the north or the interior in the lumber industry, which the lumber industry is still one of the main economic drivers in the province of British Columbia, and hopefully will be that way as we go forward. But obviously, there has been devastation in terms of the communities in northern BC, losing the mills. We have lost about 35 mills, sawmills throughout the province. Probably have another 4 or 5 to go. Maybe there's still an imbalance of you know, the too much capacity, not enough fiber. You know, so there will be challenges for this government and for the opposition in terms of where do we go and what will it look like, you know, because thousands of people are losing their jobs and maybe more to go. If I look at Houston, you know, the Canfor will shut down their super mill and is contemplating if they should invest or not in another mill. And we see the same happening throughout the industry, and it looks to me, and I'm somewhat apolitical on these issues, is that you know, I had kind of hoped that we would see more of a direction coming from the NDP government, but they are struggling with a number of issues, and we still have problems with the old growth deferrals, not overly well understood, and I say that respectfully, by a lot of the public. That's why I do my BC Forest Industry and Transition. I bring in experts, including my own knowledge, and start talking about issues that I believe are important for the public at large to know, and to say, you know, what I always say, that what is unique about British Columbia is the timber in the province of British Columbia belong to you and me, the people. That makes us unique from a lot of other people, in other areas. And access to timber is a privilege. A lot of major companies don't fully understand that and don't maybe agree with it. And there is a social obligation that goes along with it. And sometimes that is not happening in the same way that I think it should. And, you know, and there's a couple of things that I feel very strongly about. I don't believe in exporting logs, period, from the province of British Columbia, and I believe that we can do more and add more value to the fiber that we have here, and all those issues around that will become our ongoing issues that we have to deal with politically and as a province.
Well, you know, it is a very complex topic. And the fact that you have expertise and you bring people to the table is exactly what we need to be doing. I think if there had been easy answers, we would have found them by now.
Yeah.
And we haven't.
No.
I am a firm believer, John, that we will have a forest industry and a forest sector that's important in British Columbia. I am hopeful forever. It will just look different. It will be different.
Correct.
And I think we have to be able to ask the hard questions about what have we done from a policy perspective that has caused challenges in the industry, for the industry, for communities, and what do we need to do differently? So I don't think we should feel threatened or reluctant to have those really significant conversations about what does the industry look like moving forward. And I think it's incumbent upon us as, you know, as a leader in the industry, us as elected officials, to listen, to roll up our sleeves, and to figure out what we need to do differently. It is devastating when you see hundreds of workers lose their jobs. And how are we preparing communities to manage those transitions? All of those things are extremely painful in communities across, particularly northern and rural communities. So I think we need to have that kind of a healthy debate that welcomes diverse opinions. You know, that's one of the things that I've appreciated about my colleague Mike Morris. You know, he brings the issue of diversity and biodiversity to the table, looking at the industry from different perspectives. And what I really appreciate about people like Kevin Falcon in leadership is he realizes we need to have those conversations in our caucus to talk about the differences. So I think that, you know, I'm concerned, obviously, when I see a budget that indicates that, you know, when you look at the natural resource sector revenue, it's going to drop by 33% over the next 3 years. And you stop and think about, we drive the economy of British Columbia from this community and this region. So do we need to be bold and innovative? Yes, we do. Am I concerned? Absolutely. And I think we have to welcome the challenge to sit down, bring people to the table, talk about adding value, about local ownership. How do we give more benefit from this fiber that, as you point out, belongs to all of us? How do we bring that benefit to community?
Yeah, and I believe that is very important. We will go ongoing, do more of those programs, exactly like the one you said, where we bring expertise to the table, then have a discussion about where do we go from here and what does it look like. And, you know, the first and foremost, what I usually say, and what the experts will say, is that do we have a healthy base in terms of the annual allowable cut that is carefully calculated to maintain the healthy, annual allowable cut as we go forward? You know, we do that substantially, but we can do more to grow more fiber per hectare. You know, that is something that we want to invest in more, and I believe that will be done no matter who is in government, but in both governments, both parties would go forward in that kind of a policy. The other part is that more of the fiber will be in the hands of First Nations. That's a good thing. And then from First Nations perspective, it becomes a question of where do they go from there and what will that look like? Probably about 20% of the AEC. Actually, I'm doing a keynote presentation at the Telqua for a number of bands there, so I've been very involved with First Nations. Then in terms of value-added manufacture, further manufacturing, in terms of being cost competitive on a global basis, is again, I understand with some of the major companies that they are looking elsewhere to invest, but then the question becomes then, should you control as much fiber here if most of your operations are elsewhere? That becomes then a question. Especially if you look at communities like Mackenzie is a good example, Fort St. James is a good example, Houston is a Burns Lake, Chetwynd, and all of those. And those become more and more serious issues that have to be addressed, I believe, in the near term.
I refuse to see the forest industry as a sunset industry. I think it is about innovation. It is about a willingness to take divergent views and look at the values on the land base.
No question about that.
And I completely agree with you about the role of First Nations in British Columbia. When you think about the Claytley, for example, and their recent forest tenure, they become very significant partners in the forest industry in British Columbia. I also have the pleasure of working with the Simp First Nation as part of the riding in Prince George-Valemount. Very progressive, very innovative. They are going to be the drivers of policy decision making in their traditional territory. So it calls on us to work in partnership. I have had the pleasure of working with some amazing First Nations leaders, as you have. But that is now the way we need to operate in British Columbia. John, I had an interesting conversation earlier today with research institutions, for example, universities. There are so many great people who work and research and do fantastic work in universities, for example. We need to bring people like that to the table to talk about issues related to the natural resource sector. I learned today about initiatives around responding to wildfires and some of the work being done at Thompson Rivers University. So we have to capitalize on that expertise that's in universities, bring them to the table, roll up our sleeves, and let's figure it out.
You see, and at the same time, what is happening, Shirley, is that no different than in government, and bringing us back to government in a way, is that amazingly I'm also the vice chair of COFI. I'm the only one that is not tenured and the longest serving one, nearly for 30 years. And the discussions that go on there, the differences of opinions, as you well know, I'm not sitting there just to watch everybody, but the industry and the ones that have the privilege of access to timber have to look at this in terms of the industry has to change, and that cannot be keep making 2x4s and hope somebody will buy them. We have to go beyond that. The fiber that we're growing in this province is amazing in terms of compared to other fiber similar to that, other than maybe Sweden. It's amazing fiber in an amazing place, and in the long term it will have numerous opportunities for more entrepreneurship. And I can see that if we invest in this midterm until that may well be 40 years, but 40 years is not all that long. We could well be back to the 60 million cubic meters annually, and maybe much higher than that. And that would be my prediction, is that we will see much more forest being grown off this working forest that offer many, many more opportunities with more value added in a number of ways, you know, so that creating jobs for communities.
Well, John, everything changes, and the forest industry has and will continue to change.
Yeah.
And what we have to do, you know, from my perspective is, and of course you need to, you know, have an apolitical perspective on that. Yeah. You have to work with whatever government is in power, and I certainly understand that. And I think that all of us want to see the industry continue to thrive in British Columbia.
Yeah.
It will not look the same, and we know that. And I think we have to not be, I think we should not be afraid of having those tough conversations.
Exactly.
Our region, our constituents, the people that, you know, that work for you, the people who elect me, want to believe that we're going to do what's best for the short term, but also for the longer term.
Exactly.
You know, so I think we will have an industry. I think it will look very different.
Yeah.
And yes, we need people with expertise at the table saying, how do we make this work?
Exactly. So we're getting to the end of our program. What comes to, any questions that you have, or anything that you want to say before?
Well, I want to thank you, John, for the privilege of being on your podcast, and for your contributions to this province. And I think one of the things that humbles me, and I'm sure you feel that way too, is that we have the opportunity to make a difference, to speak up on issues that matter to people in northern British Columbia. I love where we live.
Yeah.
I think that we are surrounded by people who give of themselves all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just think that we need to remember that when things are tough, the people in this community and region step up every single time.
Yeah.
I've learned that. I have been enormously grateful to be returned to public office as many times as I have. And one thing I know is that it inspires me to work harder and to keep remembering why we do what we do. And that is because we live in such an incredible place.
Yeah. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you, John.
Thanks
really
for your
nice
service.
to see you. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah.